Hello everybody, welcome to your online microbiology course. I'm Dr. David Ansardi. I will be steering you through the course, and hopefully you've been through the orientation materials for the course. If you haven't, you probably want to go back and do those before you start on these video lectures. And I do want to point out to you my intention for this class is to make these video lectures as a supplement to the textbook reading. Unlike some textbooks, I know some textbooks are really dry and technical, but the textbook that we're using for this class has been written with students who are going into health sciences careers in mind, and it's a nice book. I know you guys are, at least at the time when I'm recording this video lecture, the students are using a mandatory electronic version of the textbook, but I think you'll find that it's very user-friendly, very readable, lots of nice pictures and diagrams and so forth in it, so that I do want you and strongly encourage you to do the required reading. And I'm going to try to use these video lectures to kind of hit some highlights, go through some of the tougher concepts in a different way from how your textbook is explaining it, to kind of help you along. But again, I do want to encourage you guys to do the reading. Of course, I'll be adding in some additional things to these video lectures as well, so it's not just a rehash of the textbook. Anyway, so for this first video lecture, I just want to introduce the subject of microbiology to you. And our first little, incidentally, if you haven't done so already, I do recommend that you download the PowerPoint that matches these video lectures. You know, I've got those divided up by chapter. And also I've got note pages. We've got 3 of the slides per page with little lines for taking notes. You might have used something similar in your anatomy and physiology classes. Those are available to you on Blackboard as well to download. And I do strongly encourage you to take notes while you're watching these video lectures. Don't be a passive student who's just watching like a TV show or something and you're not writing things down. That act of writing things down actually sends that information onto your brain, and for most people helps them start to remember. All right, so back to this. This first slide up here, I've got microbes, invisible invaders, and amazing allies. And microbe is basically another name for microorganism. And these include such things as the name suggests, most of these are microscopic. Not all of them. There are actually some things that are included in the microbe category that are not necessarily microscopic, and we'll talk about some examples of those. But these include things like bacteria and viruses. Those are the 2 types of microbes we'll talk the most about this semester. And right now you guys know about bacteria and viruses making you sick, but you may not know very much about what distinguishes a bacterial organism from a viral organism. And then there are fungi, algae. There are some unusual organisms called archaea that you may not have heard of before. And then there are the helminths, which are parasitic worms that we'll talk about as well. So various types of organisms that fall into this category. And invisible invaders, amazing allies. So we're used to, I bet if I asked you right now if you have sort of a negative opinion or a positive opinion of microorganisms, you would probably think negative. You're thinking germs, infection, nasty, they cause disease, they make me sick. And that is true. In a class like this, where most of you guys are going to become healthcare workers, we're mainly focusing in on these microbes that are the invisible invaders. They enter the body, and in many cases they can wind up making us sick. Those are the ones that we focus on. However, many microorganisms are amazing allies. They do very nice things for us. And one thing I want you to take away early from this class is that not all microorganisms are these bad, evil things that we need to destroy and wipe off of the face of the planet. In fact, all life on this planet is dependent on the microorganisms. If they weren't here, nothing else would be here either. And also, as you guys are going to see, the whole world essentially is covered with microorganisms. They're everywhere. They're in almost every environment that you can imagine on the earth. And most of these microorganisms really don't directly impact us. Even if they go inside your body, you get exposed to them. the vast majority of microorganisms cannot make you sick. They're harmless to us. And that's another thing I want you guys to start thinking about as well. You don't have to be overly ridiculously paranoid about microorganisms in your everyday life and think that they're all evil. All right, so again, in this class we're going to be talking about different types of microorganisms or microbes. And as I already mentioned, there are several categories of these, and I mentioned those on the last slide, so I won't rehash them. There's the word archaea, and I already mentioned these other groups. And again, in this class, we're going to mostly focus on bacteria and the viruses. Those are the two major groups of microorganisms that impact healthcare. But there are also fungi that impact our healthcare, and no doubt you guys know that already. And the helminths, parasitic worms, there are examples of those that impact healthcare. There are examples of protozoans that impact healthcare as well. The archaea and the algae, not so much. So we're not going to spend a lot of time on those in this particular class. All right, here's a word, this might be a new word for you. The microbial world, microorganisms, they are ubiquitous. Have you ever heard that term before? If you have not, that means microorganisms are everywhere. So they exist in almost every environment on the earth that we can imagine. Within the last few decades or so, microorganisms have been discovered in environments that would kill us pretty quickly. So very high temperatures, obnoxious gases that would suffocate us, low pH, high pH conditions. Even those types of environments on our planet, it has been discovered that there are microorganisms present. So they really are everywhere. They're all over every surface. They're all over your skin. They're in your mouth. They're in your intestinal tract. They're on everything that you touch. You can't get away from them. You can't kill them all. Now, as a healthcare worker, you're going to have to learn how to focus in on the bad guys, the bad types of microbes that can make us sick, and how do we control their numbers, especially in healthcare settings, and how do we prevent the types of microbes that cause disease from spreading from one person to another. All right, so some are parasitic. And what does that mean to be a parasite? Now, parasite, you might be thinking like a hookworm or a tapeworm, something like that. But other types of microorganisms can also have parasitic relationships with us. So what makes something a parasite? Now, you may be thinking that's some sort of organism that has a host. It has to live inside another organism, and that's true. But there's another part to the definition of a parasite, and that is a parasite is going to harm the host. So right now, in your mouth is full of microorganisms. I don't care how often you brush your teeth. I don't care if you gargle. You still have microorganisms in your mouth. You have many different kinds of bacteria on your skin, and down in your intestinal tract, it's pretty much a zoo of microorganisms down there. And the vast majority of those microorganisms are not harming you. They just live on or inside our bodies. Many of them are beneficial. So those are not the types of organisms that we would call parasites. It's the ones that can actually harm us and make us sick. Those we would refer to as parasitic or parasites. So again, the vast majority are not human pathogens. Pathogen is a word that you should know. A pathogen is an organism that can cause disease. All right, I do want to show you guys something real quickly. Oops, hang on. I'm going to go to a cell scale and size interactive. It's at the University of Utah Learn Genetics website. Here we go. All right, so I'll link this for you guys on Blackboard. But if you want to, if you Google Learn Genetics, University of Utah cell size and scale, it'll bring up this interactive activity for you. And I'd like you guys to take a look at this because it's going to give you some perspective about these little creatures and the molecules that make up those creatures. We're going to be studying those types of things in this class. And this is a really cool little interactive that the University of Utah biology folks there came up with to help give us some perspective about size. So if you scroll through here, it's starting off with a coffee bean and a grain of rice, a sesame seed, and you keep zooming in, and you'll zoom in here through different types of microorganisms. Or there's a skin cell, like one of your own cells that would be in the epidermis of your skin, and there's a human red blood cell. So you can keep going, and see some examples of different types of microorganisms or parts of cells that you may have studied in other classes. One thing you'll notice here, like here's a E. coli bacterium. The word bacteria is actually plural. A single bacterial cell is called a bacterium. And you've probably heard of E. coli before. That's a type of bacteria that lives in our intestinal tract. And normally harmless. There are some strains of E. coli that are capable of making us sick, though. So you can see how small it is compared to these other things. And as you keep zooming in, here are some example viruses like the measles virus, HIV, influenza virus. So viruses are really, really, really small. They're very tiny. They're smaller than bacteria. And if you keep zooming in, you wind up zooming into things like hemoglobin. You studied that if you took Biology 202. There's what an antibody looks like if you talked about those in your Biology 202 course. You know, there's a phospholipid like you have in a cell membrane. There's glucose and a water molecule, and all the way down to a single carbon atom. So it's just trying to give you some perspective about the size of these different things. So that's a good little activity to take a look at and start getting a feel for that. All right, a few fun facts about microorganisms here for the beginning of the class. And I pulled these out of a book that I'll give you the name of shortly. But some of these are pretty fun. The number of microbes in a teaspoonful of good garden soil, about 1 trillion. So these things are tiny. There are tremendous numbers of them on our planet. Most of those would be bacteria, but you would have some fungi in there as well in all likelihood. How many different species of microbes, individual types, in that teaspoonful? About 10,000. So 1 trillion total population, but about 10,000 species or types in there. How many microbial species currently exist on the planet? Nobody knows. There are some biologists speculate in the lower billions. Most of those have never been discovered. We can't see most of these microbes. They're microscopic. And so we're only now beginning to discover some of them, and that's actually being done using DNA forensics type techniques like you see on crime shows and so forth. Those types of things are helping us identify microorganisms that we've never been able to detect before. This one might gross you out. How many microbes per square inch of human skin? Over 600,000. The ratio of microbial cells to human cells in and on the human body, about 10 to 1. Some people say 9, some people say 10. Nobody knows for sure. There's no way to actually count all the microbes that live on or inside our bodies, but this is the best estimate that we currently have. So what this means is for every one of your cells, and the human body is made up of many trillions of cells, there are about 10 microbial cells. Now they don't take up that much space. We don't notice them because they're so tiny compared to our cells. If you could weigh all of the microbes in your body, it would probably come out to about 2 to 4 pounds. If you had some way to scoop them all up and put them on a scale, about 2 to 4 pounds. So if you need to lose 2 to 4 pounds quickly, murder all your microbes. All right, many microbes reproduce really quickly. We'll be talking about that in more detail, not very far into the class. How many times can an Escherichia coli, that's Escherichia is the genus name, coli is the species name. We'll be talking about that shortly. All living things are given 2 names, and the first name is what genus they're classified into, and the second name is their species name. So that's the the full name for good old E. coli that we hear about sometimes in the news. How many times can one cell reproduce in a day? About 72. That's if it's very happy, has lots of nutrients, optimal kinds of conditions. When did microbes first appear on the Earth? Current thinking is about 3.8 billion years ago. Current thinking on the age of the Earth is about 4.5 billion years ago. So you had about 0.7 billion years, about 700 million years there where the Earth existed with no microbial life. And microbes were the first life forms to exist on the planet for quite a long time. About 3 billion years, microorganisms had the place to themselves. More complex type organisms began to develop on the planet less than 1 billion years ago. All right, when did humans first notice that microbes existed? So you can't see these things. So we didn't know they were there until somebody invented a microscope, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. The 17th century, which means the 1600s. Now, so it was in the 1600s that we first noticed microbes. When did humans confirm that there were some microbes that caused disease? It was actually the late 1800s before anybody proved that. So for a while, people just thought microorganisms were kind of these curiosities, these interesting things that existed, but nobody could, it took until the late 1800s, the 19th century, before somebody proved that certain microbes could cause certain diseases. All right, here's a crazy number. The total number of viruses on the planet. That's a 1 with 20-something zeros after it. Viruses are by far the smallest microbes, much smaller even than bacteria. Bacteria would be your next smallest on the list. And so the current estimate is, and again, nobody knows for sure, but 1 with 20-something zeros after it. And if you could line them all up end to end, they would be wider than the Milky Way galaxy that our solar system exists in. Now, that sounds kind of scary. You know, we're just being bombarded with viruses in every environment. And that is true, but viruses, you know, as we've talked about already with microbes, not all microbes cause human disease. In fact, the vast, vast, vast majority don't. So out of all of these viruses, the number that could actually do harm to you, infect your body, and use you as a host is very small. Most of these viruses have to have a host, but there are viruses that infect things like tomato plants or dogs and cats, as you guys know, and generally those viruses don't cross species. Some do, but most don't. But even algae, even bacteria, believe it or not, can be infected by viruses, which is kind of weird to think about. So there are microbes that infect other microbes. If you could, or we did that one already, 1 milliliter of seawater, a milliliter is 1/1000th of a liter. So not very big, pretty tiny little. If you've ever seen a syringe before, kind of a typical syringe in a doctor's office, about that high up on the syringe would be a milliliter. 1 milliliter of seawater would have several million viruses in it. But again, most of those are not going to be harmful to you. They're probably viruses that infect fish and jellyfish and seaweed and things like that. All right, and there's the source from a book called The Invisible Kingdom by Aiden Ben Barak. It was published in 2009. And then here's a website as well that you can check out, a virology website that includes some of these pretty little fun microbial facts. All right, so I'm going to conclude the first video clip there. I'm going to try not to make these video clips all that long so you don't have to endure like an hour and 15-minute sermon every time you sit down to watch videos. And I do encourage you to, you know, periodically work on your homework assignments that accompany these video lectures and reading assignments. There's no reason to go through 1 or 2 chapters before you start working on your homework and start reviewing. The nice thing about an online class is you can watch a 15 or 20-minute video and immediately go back and start reviewing the material. It's going to help you, since you just heard it, it's going to help reinforce that information that you just covered. It's going to help you learn it faster. So that is one advantage to a distance education class versus traditional classroom type lectures where you have to sit there for a long period of time and try to process lots and lots of information all at once. All right, so that concludes the first video lecture, just an introduction. Be sure you're doing your reading. And then we're going to move on to the next topic, microbes and the planet. So we'll talk a little bit about the ways that microorganisms influence what's going on the planet Earth.